At a high-end restaurant in the heart of the city, a casually dressed black man walked in and politely asked for a seat. But instead of being greeted with respect, he was ignored, mocked by the manager, and led to a table no one cared to notice. What she didn't know was that the man she dismissed so easily was far from ordinary, and by the time she found out who he really was, it was too late to fix her mistake. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. The soft golden glow of Orenwald spilled onto the sidewalk like liquid luxury, flickering against the polished windows that separated the outside world from a curated sanctuary of exclusivity. Inside, chandeliers hung like captured stardust, and the murmur of elegant conversation floated above the clink of fine crystal. Men in tailored Italian suits and women draped in silk and diamonds sipped from vintage stamped glasses, as if time itself bowed to them. The air was scented with truffle oil, rare spices, and old money. Then the front doors opened, and the entire rhythm shifted. Hello friends, if you're new here then don't forget to hit subscribe button, and if you like then hit the like button also, and don't forget to tell me in the comments where you from watching this video. He didn't stride in like he owned the place, he simply walked, slow, unassuming. A tall black man, mid-40s, in a charcoal hoodie that had clearly seen a few laundry cycles, dark joggers, and worn leather sneakers. A baseball cap shadowed most of his face. To the untrained eye, he might have seemed lost, like someone who took a wrong turn and wandered in from a basketball court. Clarissa Monroe spotted him instantly. She always did. Years of working as the maitre d' at Orenwald had trained her to evaluate a guest in a single blink. Her posture stiffened behind the podium, lips parting ever so slightly in disbelief. She tilted her head with just enough condescension to cut glass. Her eyes traveled from his shoes to his cap, lingering, judging, calculating. This man, she thought, didn't belong here. Not in her restaurant. He stepped forward with calm precision and offered a smile that barely creased his lips. "Good evening," he said, voice low and smooth, with the effortless composure of someone who was used to watching people underestimate him. "I was hoping to get a table for one." Clarissa didn't return the smile. Her response, layered in ice and a performative tone of politeness, dripped with insult. "Are you sure you meant to come here?" she asked, her voice just loud enough for the two older men near the wine cellar to overhear. One of them turned slightly, curiosity sparked. Desmond Hill didn't flinch. "Yes," he said simply. "This is Orenwald, right?" Her laughter was short and sharp, the kind that was meant to sting, not amuse. "Oh, it is," she replied. "It's just, we usually have a reservation policy and a dress code." Her eyes scanned him again, stopping pointedly on the hoodie. "Unless you're dropping something off." The words hung in the air, acidic and deliberate. There was no mistaking the implication. He wasn't dressed like the people she was used to serving. He didn't look like wealth, like pedigree, like someone who mattered in this room. Desmond's smile didn't waver, but something shifted behind his eyes, subtle, quiet, like a storm still gathering. "No," he said calmly. "I'm here to dine. I'd appreciate a table, if one's available." Clarissa blinked once, slowly, and with a patronizing nod, turned to her tablet. "Fine. I'll see what I can do." But as she tapped through the digital reservations list, she didn't check for openings. Instead, she was stalling, letting her disdain simmer just long enough to bubble. "Must have taken a wrong turn from the food truck festival," she muttered under her breath, just loud enough for the couple waiting behind to smirk. The woman chuckled softly. Clarissa turned back to Desmond, her voice coated in that customer service sweetness that always tasted like poison. "Right this way, sir," she said, lips curling around the title like it burned her mouth. And with that, she turned on her heel, heels clicking with performative grace, leading him into the very heart of opulence, intent on showing him exactly where he didn't belong. And still he followed. Not in silence, but in control. Every step measured. Every gaze received with calm. And as the chandeliers shimmered above them like stars that refused to fall, Desmond Hill walked into a space that had decided his worth long before he had uttered a single word, but they didn't know yet. They had no idea that they were the ones about to be measured. Clarissa led Desmond through the restaurant with an air of calculated poise, her back straight, steps sharp, every heel click an exclamation point in her unspoken judgment. As they passed through the main dining room, eyes lifted, some subtly, others not at all. Conversations faltered for half a breath. Forks hovered midair. Desmond didn't miss the glances. The side eyes. The whispered exchanges. A man in a tailored navy suit raised an eyebrow as his date leaned in and murmured something behind her wine glass, her gaze never leaving Desmond's shoes. Clarissa didn't slow down. She weaved past marble pillars and candlelit tables, bypassing open booths with prime views, past private alcoves reserved for celebrities and tech moguls, and continued until they reached the far corner of the restaurant near the swinging door to the kitchen. The light dimmed here, not ambience, just neglect. The music was drowned out by the faint clatter of dishes and muffled staff chatter beyond the back door. A thin draft leaked from the service hallway, carrying with it the aroma of seared garlic and burnt toast. Clarissa gestured to a small table pushed awkwardly against the wall. The chair was slightly uneven, its seat cushion flattened from disuse. She didn't bother adjusting it. "Here we are," she said too brightly. "Something a little more your speed." Her words were dipped in honey but laced with venom. She dropped the menu in front of him with a thud that wasn't loud, but deliberate. It didn't go unnoticed. A woman at a nearby table turned, her brows knitting. Clarissa smiled as if she hadn't just insulted him to his face and stepped back, folding her arms lightly behind her back. Desmond looked at the table, then back at her, expression unreadable. He pulled out the chair, lowered himself slowly, calmly, as if he were settling into a throne rather than an exile seat. "This will do just fine," he said. His tone was steady, free of irony but loaded with quiet resolve. He didn't need to ask if other seats had been available. He already knew. He glanced toward the center of the room, where the chandeliers sparkled like diamonds, where the clink of champagne flutes danced in harmony with self-importance. There was a clear message in this placement. He got it. Clarissa didn't move. Her eyes scanned his face, waiting for something, a flinch, a frown, some flicker of shame. But Desmond gave her none of it. So she turned with a flick of her hair and walked away, but not before offering one last jab over her shoulder. "Enjoy your meal. Not everyone gets such a special seat." She didn't look back. But she didn't have to. The weight of her words clung to the air like perfume gone sour. From across the room, an elderly couple exchanged glances. Mr. Whitmore, dressed in a charcoal three-piece suit, leaned closer to his wife and whispered. She placed him near the kitchen, like he's staff on break. Mrs. Whitmore, her pearls shimmering against her collarbone, frowned deeply. "He hasn't said a single harsh word," she said softly. "And yet, she's treating him like a mistake on the reservation list." Desmond unfolded his napkin and laid it across his lap with precision. His heartbeat remained calm, his hands steady, but inside, a memory stirred. One of a high school gym. Of coaches who misread silence for weakness. Of eyes that judged him before his name was called. The setting had changed. The language, more refined. The insults, dressed in velvet. But the script was the same. Still, he didn't flinch. He had learned long ago that the loudest rebuttal was composure. And so, sitting in the dimmest corner of the most luminous
room, Desmond Hill waited, not for food, not for apology, but for clarity. And clarity always came. Clarissa returned to Desmond's table with the practiced grace of someone who had delivered 1,000 menus to people she deemed worthy. But her steps were slower now. Deliberate. Like a cat circling a mouse she couldn't quite read. The menu she held this time was pristine, bound in dark leather, embossed with gold. She placed it in front of him with quiet firmness, her fingers lingering at the edge as she leaned ever so slightly forward. Her voice was smooth, but sharpened with intent. "Would you like me to walk you through our selections?" she asked, eyes skimming his hoodie like it was an error in the frame. "Some of our guests find the pricing informative." Desmond met her gaze, unfazed. "I think I can manage," he said. But Clarissa wasn't done. She slid her finger along the edge of the menu, stopping at a corner like a predator drawing blood. "Just so you're aware," she added, her tone saccharine and rising in volume just enough to reach a nearby table, "our most exclusive dish is the A5 Wagyu tenderloin with seared foie gras and black truffle demi-glace, $450. It's not listed on the printed menu, of course, it's not for everyone." Desmond's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. He didn't look at the menu. He didn't need to. "I'll have that," he said calmly. "Medium rare. And bring me the Classe de la Croix Gru bottle." For a split second, Clarissa's mask faltered. The smirk froze at the corners of her mouth. She hadn't expected him to say that, not without blinking, not without stammering. She recovered quickly, tilting her head with mock admiration. "Well," she said with syrupy disbelief, "bold choice. Let's hope you know how to appreciate it. That cut isn't for amateurs." Desmond's voice remained steady. "You'd be surprised what people can appreciate when they're not being sized up by the staff." Clarissa paused, thrown off just enough for the subtle tension in the room to press in a little tighter. A young woman at the adjacent table, Sienna, sharply dressed in a sapphire-sheathed dress, set down her glass. "Wow," she muttered to her date. Did she just say that to his face? Her companion, a tall man in a gray blazer, shook his head slowly. "It's like she's auditioning to be rude." Clarissa, unaware of the eyes now following her more closely, turned with a flourish and walked away, her heels tapping with renewed defiance. As she passed the bar, she leaned into a passing colleague, Jared, a younger server with clear discomfort on his face. "Guy in the corner just ordered the Wagyu and a Grand Cru," she whispered, half laughing. "Probably thinks this is some YouTube stunt. Let's see if he stays when the bill hits the table." Jared didn't laugh. He glanced toward Desmond, seated still and serene, flipping through the rest of the menu like he was browsing poetry. "He doesn't look like he's trying to impress anyone," Jared replied quietly. "He looks like he's waiting for something." And he was. Not for service. Not even for food. Desmond Hill had spent years in rooms where he didn't look the part. Where his presence was questioned before his words were ever heard. He recognized the patterns, the condescension in Clarissa's voice, the way her gaze slid off him like he was made of something lesser. But he also recognized power. And power didn't always arrive in a suit. Sometimes it arrived at a corner table, in silence, with a fork and a name no one bothered to ask. The minutes stretched like wire, taut and humming with tension. Desmond sat alone at the edge of luxury, his table cold and forgotten, while the rest of Orienval basked in warm service and attentive charm. Servers glided from table to table, pouring wine with poetic flourish, describing dishes with reverence usually reserved for art. Yet no one came to refill his water. No one asked if he needed anything. His menu lay untouched since he ordered, a silent monument to the disdain cloaked beneath silk smiles. Across the room, laughter rippled like champagne bubbles. But around Desmond, the air was still, as if Clarissa had built an invisible wall and dared anyone to cross it. Clarissa passed by his table twice. Once carrying a tray of smoked scallops. Once trailing behind a sommelier. And both times, she didn't so much as glance in his direction.
Walked with theatrical grace, chin tilted high, her expression frozen in professional indifference, but the performance was wearing thin. Jared, standing near the bar, watched with growing discomfort, his brows furrowed as he noticed Desmond's glass still empty, no bread, no check-in, not even a nod. He leaned toward the hostess next to him. "He ordered before that couple," he said under his breath, motioning toward the table in the center of the room, "and they're already on their appetizer." The hostess shrugged. Clarissa said not to interfere. Said he's probably just trying to make a point. Jared's jaw tightened. He hasn't said a word. She's the one making a scene. From her position near the wine display, Clarissa chuckled softly as she recounted the situation to a silver-haired patron. Some people just love attention, she said, voice casual but sharp as glass. They walk in here dressed like they're running errands at a gas station and expect to be treated like royalty. It's kind of cute, really, like a social experiment. Desmond heard it, every word, not because she said it directly to him, but because she wanted him to hear. That was the art of her cruelty, never explicit enough to be reported, just loud enough to wound. Still, he didn't move. His back remained straight, his posture regal, his silence more eloquent than any retort. But behind his calm, a memory stirred, being 17 in a locker room when a recruiter refused to shake his hand because he thought he was the janitor. The sting hadn't faded, it had just gone deeper, quieter. At a nearby table, Mrs. Whitmore folded her napkin and placed it down with an audible sigh. "This is disgraceful," she whispered. "That young woman is making a fool of herself, and no one's stopping her." Her husband, eyes narrowed on Clarissa, nodded. "He's not waiting for food," he murmured. "He's waiting to be seen. And right now, everyone's watching." Sienna, still seated near the bar, leaned forward, elbows on the table, her gaze sharp. "She's going to regret this," she whispered to her companion. "You can feel it. He's not just anyone. He's something. And the calm ones? They're the ones who shift the room." Desmond adjusted the napkin on his lap, eyes steady, breathing even. He could feel the glances, the tension, the weight of judgment pressing against him like fog, but he didn't push back. Not yet. Let them watch. Let them whisper. He hadn't come to fight for dignity. He had brought it with him. All he had to do now was wait and let the cracks show on their own. The silence fractured like glass under pressure when the tall, lean figure of Mr. Alvarez, the general manager of Orion Vault, emerged briskly from the back hallway. His expression was tight, brow furrowed, not in confusion but in quiet urgency. He moved with purpose, his polished shoes muffled by the velvet carpeting as he scanned the dining room, then locked eyes on the table near the kitchen, the table that had no business being occupied by a man like him. When he saw Desmond, everything about his posture changed. His stride slowed, head dipped ever so slightly, not in apology, but in acknowledgement. Reverence. He approached the table like a man who had just realized something had gone very, very wrong. And as he stopped at Desmond's side, every head nearby turned. Clarissa, standing at the bar laughing with two patrons, paused mid-sentence, the glass in her hand tilted just enough to spill a drop of wine. "Mr. Hill," Alvarez said, voice low and sincere. "Sir, I sincerely apologize. We weren't informed you'd be joining us tonight." The room exhaled, not in sound, but in stunned silence. "Mr. Hill." The name cut through the tension like a hot blade. Sienna's eyes widened, her hand rising instinctively to her mouth. Jared straightened near the bar, lips parting in quiet shock. Clarissa didn't move. She stood frozen, her eyes locked on the man she tried so hard to reduce, now being addressed like royalty by the very manager she reported to. Desmond looked up, calm and collected, and offered a small, measured nod. "I didn't come here to be recognized," he said, his voice even and strong. "I came here to eat." Alvarez's throat bobbed as he swallowed. "And you should have been treated accordingly. I take full responsibility. I'll personally ensure everything from this point forward is corrected." "No," Desmond replied, still seated, still composed. "It's not your responsibility, it's hers." He didn't need to point. The entire restaurant followed the weight of his gaze. Clarissa was already turning pale, her lips slightly parted, her facade slipping like melted wax. Someone whispered, too loud to be contained. "That's Desmond Hill." He's one of the founders of Orion's global expansion. Another voice followed, he owns part of this restaurant. She had no idea who he was. Clarissa's feet remained planted, but her entire body trembled in place. Every cruel remark, every dismissive glance, every word she'd laced with poison echoed back at her in a deafening storm of realization. She had humiliated a man who could sign her paycheck, or her termination, with a nod. Desmond finally stood. Not to intimidate, but to re-enter the room. The chandeliers above seemed to dim, as if giving him space to speak. Respect, he said slowly, deliberately, shouldn't depend on who someone is once you recognize them. It should be given the moment they walk through the door. The words hung heavy. Clarissa blinked, eyes rimmed with panic, her mouth opening to speak but no sound coming. You don't need to know my name to do your job right, Desmond continued, eyes steady. You just need to remember that every person in this room, no matter their clothes, their skin, or their seat, deserves dignity. Mr. Whitmore clapped once, loud, firm, then again. Soon Sienna joined. Then others. The applause swelled, not raucous but deliberate. Clarissa turned away, her face burning. It wasn't just a mistake anymore. It was a reckoning. And Desmond Hill hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't demanded respect. He embodied it. And in doing so, made clear to everyone watching, the corner table hadn't diminished him. It had only revealed them. The applause faded slowly, like the final notes of a symphony, leaving behind a silence that hummed with weight. Clarissa stood rooted in place, her polished exterior stripped raw, eyes glossy but dry, face pale beneath the dimming lights. She could feel every gaze in the room pressing down on her, not with rage, but with disappointment. And somehow, that was worse. She wasn't just embarrassed. She was revealed. The power she thought she held had been an illusion. And now it was unraveling, thread by thread. Desmond turned to face the room, his presence now fully commanding, not by volume or show, but by the quiet gravity of someone who had earned every inch of ground he stood on. We live in a world, he said, voice low but resonant, where people are judged before they speak, by their shoes, their accent, their skin. He let that sit for a beat. But places like this, restaurants, gathering spaces, are supposed to be different. They're supposed to welcome. No one moved. Even the servers along the walls had stopped pretending to polish glasses or adjust napkins. Clarissa finally took one hesitant step forward. But Desmond's gaze cut to her, not cruel, but sharp. A mirror, not a knife. When someone walks in your door, he continued, eyes scanning the space, your job isn't to ask if they belong. Your job is to make sure they feel like they do. He turned slightly, facing Clarissa now fully. You forgot that. Clarissa opened her mouth. The apology trembled there, unfinished. But Desmond raised a hand, gentle, but firm. I'm not interested in apologies, he said. I'm interested in change. Because this, he gestured around the room, this wasn't just about me. Everyone watched it happen. And everyone stayed quiet. That silence, that's where the real damage lives. Mr. Whitmore from the center table lowered his gaze. Sienna folded her arms tightly, jaw clenched. Even Jared looked away, guilt blooming in his chest. Desmond wasn't just holding Clarissa accountable. He was holding up a mirror to the entire room. Clarissa finally found her voice, barely more than a whisper. You're right, she said. I didn't see you. Not for who you are. Just for what I assumed. Desmond nodded once. Assumptions are easy. Respect takes effort. But if you're going to stand at the front of this place, representing it, you'd better carry more than a smile and a dress code. You'd better carry grace. Alvarez stepped forward, face drawn with understanding. Mr. Hill, I assure you, this will be addressed immediately. Desmond turned to him, voice softer now. Make it mean something. Don't just correct the action. Change the mindset. He exhaled slowly, like releasing years of restraint. I spent too long walking into rooms like this knowing exactly how people will see me. But tonight, everyone saw it happen. No one can pretend otherwise. Clarissa looked down, her hands trembling against her sides. The applause, the whispers, the eyes, none of it had hurt as much as those words. Because she knew he wasn't just condemning her. He was offering her a choice. And that was the mercy in it. Desmond stepped back toward his table, pausing only once more. What defines this place isn't the chandeliers or the wine list. It's how you treat the person you least expect to matter. That's where your real class shows. And then he sat. Calm. Unbothered. Regal in his stillness, while the room around him reeled in quiet reflection. The lesson had been delivered not with fury, but with truth. And truth, when spoken with grace, doesn't just change people. It humbles them. Later that night, long after the last diners had slipped into chauffeured cars and the hum of conversation had faded into memory, the staff of Orion Vault gathered in a quiet circle beneath the softened glow of the chandeliers. The room felt different now. No longer a theater of performance, but a space laid bare. Desmond stood in the center. His presence as steady as it had been hours earlier, but his voice now softer, less about declaration and more about direction. What happened tonight, he began, wasn't unique. It happens everywhere. But tonight, it happened here. And that gives you a chance to decide what kind of place this is going to be moving forward. No one spoke. Clarissa stood to the side, her posture rigid, not out of defiance, but out of the weight of accountability. Her eyes met his only once, and he nodded. Not in judgment, but in invitation. This restaurant, Desmond continued, isn't defined by its prices or its decor. That's what people think class is. But true class has nothing to do with how much someone spends or how they're dressed. It's about how you treat the person who walks through that door without any need to prove themselves. Jared shifted slightly, his expression one of quiet conviction. Others began to nod. Even Alvarez lowered his head with a breath that sounded like relief. Desmond looked around the circle. Every table, he said, is a chance to offer more than just food. It's a chance to offer dignity. Respect is free. But it's also priceless. Clarissa stepped forward then, hesitant but no longer hiding behind a uniform or a title. Mr. Hill, she said, voice tight but sincere. I know sorry isn't enough. But I want to learn from this. I need to. He studied her for a long second, then replied. That's all any of us can do. Grow. If you're willing to do the work, then this doesn't have to define you. But it will follow you unless you change who you are, not just what you do. There was no applause. No performance. Just the quiet agreement of people beginning to understand that their job was never just about serving. It was about seeing. As Desmond stepped out of Orion Vault and into the cool San Francisco night, the city lights shimmered around him like reflections of everything that had just unfolded. He walked slowly, hands in his pockets, his steps silent but certain. He didn't glance back. Not because he didn't care, but because he trusted that what needed to change had already begun. Somewhere behind those glass doors, a lesson had been planted. Not for revenge. Not for validation. But for transformation. He looked up at the sky, at the indifferent stars scattered across a velvet black canvas, and he thought about how often people confuse worth with wealth, polish with principle. He smiled to himself, faint but genuine. You don't need to wear a suit to deserve respect. You just need to walk into the room knowing you do.